Hello, and welcome to another podcast from HDFS Extension Group at Ohio State University. Today we're going to talk about trends in family formation and family instability in the U.S. and in Ohio. Today we'll be talking about three main topics. First, the trends in family formation. The second, trends in children's family contexts and a bit about their economic well-being. And third, how this contributes to instability in children's family lives. The goal for this podcast is to help you understand recent family trends, how these trends have created instability in children's family lives, and the implications for families and children in the U.S. and also in Ohio. I begin by closely examining the trends in family formation in recent decades. I focus on nonmarital childbearing throughout because this is one of the most important changes in family formation behavior in recent decades. I will also discuss the role of cohabitation and how nonmarital fertility is associated with other family trends. I want to note that I will be discussing women's fertility experiences for the most part during this podcast. This is because most data on pregnancy and childbearing in the U.S. is collected from women, so we know most about women's fertility and much less about men's fertility. Women also tend to have better recall of their fertility experiences, so they are considered more reliable in reporting. The most recent cycle of the National Survey of Family Growth in 2007 does collect fertility information from men, and hopefully future studies should provide some new insight into men's experiences. But in this podcast, I will focus on women's fertility. This figure displays the birth rates for married and unmarried women from 1980 through 2005. The rate is the number of births to married and unmarried women per 1,000 in the population, which is a good statistic to report because it accounts for differences in population size. Over the past few decades, we see that birth rates to married women have been declining, while birth rates to unmarried women have been rising. For example, between 1980 and 2005, birth rates to married women declined from 97 to 87.3. And at the same time, birth rates to unmarried women rose from 29.4 to 47.5. These two trends help us understand why the percent of nonmarital births have risen in recent decades. During the same time period, however, the overall fertility rate for U.S. women did not fluctuate very much between 1980 and 2005, and by 2005 had only declined about 2 points from 68.4 to 66.7. Thus, in the U.S., we observe a pattern where the decline in marital fertility is being replaced almost entirely by the rise in non-marital fertility. And the question that arises is, why is this happening? Several family trends in recent decades contribute to the rise in non-marital fertility. First, the age at first marriage has climbed steadily in recent decades. In 2006, the average age at first marriage was about 26 years for women and 27 years for men. Second, while young adults are delaying first marriages, they are not delaying forming romantic unions, and all of the delay in first marriage is explained by the rise in non-marital cohabitation. Approximately half of all non-marital fertility also occurs to a cohabiting couple. Finally, approximately 40% of all first marriages will end in divorce within the first 15 years, and this high but stable divorce rate results in many women who are single again while they're still in their fertile years. Thus, these three changes all contribute to a situation where women are now spending a greater proportion of their lives unmarried, and they're often sexually active and thus at risk for a non-marital pregnancy and birth. Beyond these demographic shifts, there are also shifts in attitudes in the U.S. population that have become more accepting of newer family formation patterns such as cohabitation and non-marital childbearing, among others. This next figure describes how non-marital birth rates differ considerably by the age of the mother. Typically, these rates are lower among younger teens aged 15 to 17, and non-marital birth rates rise for older teens and women in their 20s and then drop off again for women in their 30s. This figure also shows that in recent years, that is between 2000 and 2006, non-marital birth rates have increased for every age group, except for young teens whose rates dropped slightly. For example, between 2000 and 2006, non-marital birth rates increased from 59 to 62 for those aged 18 to 19 years old, from 71 to 80 for those aged 20 to 24, from 62 to 75 for those women aged 25 to 29, and from 41 to 55 for women aged 30 to 34, and finally from 21 to 27 for women aged 35 to 39. In all these years, non-marital birth rates were highest for women in their early 20s, aged 20 to 24 years old. This next figure describes racial and ethnic variability in the unmarried birth rates for women in the U.S. The birth rates for unmarried women was 51 overall in 2006. This means that for every 1,000 unmarried women, 51 had a birth in 2006. This is up from 44 in 2002 and 1995. In 2006, Hispanic unmarried women had the highest unmarried birth rate at 106, which means that for every 1,000 unmarried Hispanic women, 106 had a birth in 2006, and that is up from 88 in 2002. As you can see from this figure, the birth rate for unmarried women differs a lot by race and ethnicity of the woman. The rates are highest for Hispanic women in 1995, 2002, and 2006, followed by non-Hispanic black women. Non-Hispanic white women and Asian women have lower unmarried birth rates. This next figure shows how the percent of all U.S. births to unmarried women doubled from 18.4 in 1980 to 36.9 in 2005. From the prior slides, we understand that this sharp increase is due to two factors: rising birth rates to unmarried women and also declining birth rates to married women. The combination of these two trends has resulted in a larger percent of all children being born to unmarried parents. This next figure shows how the percent of births to unmarried women has grown since 1990 in Ohio. In 1990, the percent of births to unmarried women was 28.9% in Ohio, which was nearly identical to the overall percent in the U.S. during that same year. The percent of unmarried births has grown slowly and steadily since 1990 and reached 40.4% in 2006 in Ohio. Thus, we have a similar proportion of all births in Ohio that were to unmarried women as in the U.S. overall, although the figures are slightly higher in Ohio than in the U.S. overall. Ohio experiences similar trends in racial and ethnic variability in non-marital childbearing as the overall U.S. population. In 2006, the percent of non-marital births was higher in Ohio compared to the U.S. overall and across racial and ethnic groups. For example, in 2006, 38.5% of all U.S. births were to an unmarried woman, compared to 40.5% of all Ohio births, which is slightly higher than the overall percent of the U.S. The exception is that the percent of unmarried births for Hispanic women in Ohio, which was 49.9% in 2006, is lower than the percent of unmarried births to Hispanic women in the U.S. overall, which was 56.9% in 2006. Next, I'm going to present two slides that track changes in family structure in Ohio and in the U.S. and corresponding poverty outcomes for children in different family structures. This figure shows that the trend both nationwide and in Ohio in the past 15 years has been a decline in the percent of married couple families with children and a rise in the percent of single-parent families with children. Between 1990 and 2006, the percent of married couple families with children declined from 74.2% to 69.1% of all families in the U.S., which is a 5.1 percentage point decline. In Ohio, the decline was from 74.7% to 66.7%, which reflects a 7.9 percentage point decline. At the same time, the percent of families headed by a single parent has risen. In the U.S. overall, single-parent families with children represented 30.9% of all families with children. That's up 5.1 percentage points from 25.8 in 1990. In Ohio, single-parent families with children represent a slightly larger percent of all families with children, 33.3%, which is one-third, and that's up from 25.4% in 1990. Thus, the trend in both Ohio and in the U.S. is away from two-parent families with children and towards single-parent families with children. And this trend is occurring slightly faster in Ohio than it is in the U.S. overall. This next figure describes family poverty for children in the U.S. and Ohio from 1990 to 2006 by family structure type. It is clear that a much higher percent of children living in female-headed families experience poverty. For example, in 1990, 6.5% of children in two-parent families in Ohio experienced poverty, compared to 49.2% of children in Ohio living in female-headed families. These differences persist across the time period of observation in this figure, but they do fluctuate a lot, and this fluctuation between decades and years likely reflects more macroeconomic conditions during the specific years. The figures presented illustrate that these trends in non-marital childbearing, cohabitation, and the shift away from two-parent married couple families with children, along with other trends we didn't go over, such as trends in divorce, remarriage, and repartnering, all contribute to a situation where children's family lives have become less stable. This is called instability in children's lives. Recent studies have found that children who experience multiple transitions in their family structure tend to have worse outcomes on a host of indicators compared to those children who have fewer transitions in their family structure. Extension education programs can consider these important research findings when designing family life programs. For example, currently we deliver programming on divorce education, which is certainly helpful. In the future, we can build on these programs by focusing also on instability in children's lives and recognizing that a significant proportion of children experience other family structures than marriage and divorce, such as living with a cohabiting parent who then transitions into a single-parent living arrangement. Parenting programs can also encourage parents to make careful decisions about repartnering or remarrying when those options arise, keeping in mind the need to promote children's family lives as stable as possible in order to promote their well-being. We hope this podcast provided a useful information for your extension work. Feel free to contact me with any questions or for further discussion. Just for a heads up, the divorce education team in OSU Extension are reorganizing and meeting, and we're going to now be called the Family Instability Education Team. So we plan to incorporate some of these trends and some of this new research on instability in children's lives into our extension programming in the future. Thank you for your attention.